Hello and welcome to yet another episode of Mastering Dungeons. I'm Shawn Merwin, here with my co-host, as always, the wonderful, the ebullient. That's a word, isn't it? I think it's a good word. Teos Avadia. Hey, Teos.
Hi, Shawn. How are you doing? How was your weekend?
I I'm
Was it
doing good. I'm
ebullient?
using words like ebullient, which I don't even know if they're a word or what they mean. So that's where I'm at today.
It means horse's butt. What? It's
Yes,
cheerful and
yes.
full of energy. So that was well
It
used.
probably
Good job.
does. But you know who aren't horses' butts? Our listeners.
Yeah, that's
Our
true.
listeners are awesome. And
They
we
are.
have some that have been talking to us. Um, some of them are talking specifically about fate. And
Mm.
later in the episode, for our main segment, we are going to talk to the one and the only Mike Olson, who worked on the Fate Core book, as well as several other Fate products. And he is going to tell us his take on Fate, what it means to play Fate versus play D&D, and give us some more background information on that.
Yeah, his name's on the cover. Really cool.
It's true. And we have a great question this week from our listener corner. Tim Kreider via Patreon asked this great question. I've been curious about why each of you have shown some reluctance to refer to 1D&D by its creator's chosen name for it. Months into the playtest, I still hear you sometimes say 6E or 5.5E or whatever. I found it odd from two people who are generally respectful, precise speakers. Is this a deliberate choice? And if so, why? Or if this is an unintended pattern, why do you think you have trouble simply saying 1D&D? And thank you for pointing this out, Tim, because this is a great question. If I have come across as being disrespectful toward the efforts of the design team, then I really do need to apologize because I have nothing but respect for those designers. Some of them I know personally, some of them I know and respect from their past work. So I don't want to be disrespectful in any way. Teos, I don't want to speak for you here. Do you have anything to add?
I do not hate all living things. No, you're spot on. It's not
Okay.
meant as disrespect. And I do have explanations for at least for my take, but I want to hear yours, Shawn.
Okay. So the reason I switch back and forth is because I've been through so many edition changes that what a company wants it to be called and what it will end up being called is really up to the fans. It's up to the people who are consuming it. And so when I say these things, I don't say them out of disrespect. I'm not doing it purposefully to say, haha, you want to call it 1D&D and I'm never going to call it 1D&D. The reason I do it is because it is going to be called what it's going to be called. And what it is going to end up being called in the end will depend on what exactly its relationship is to the previous edition. So if it ends up being a version of fifth edition with some minor tweaks, it will be called 5.5. That's really what's going to happen, no matter what they market it as, because that's what it's going to be
Yeah.
seen as. If it's a completely different edition, it's going to be called sixth edition. Because here's what a conversation will play out as. Hey, says player one, I'm going to put together a new D&D campaign. Do you want to join? And the person two is going to say, absolutely. What edition are you playing? I never played any of the previous editions, but I did play 5e. And so person one will say, well, we're using the new edition. And person two will say, well, is it much different than 5e? Will it be hard to learn? And the person will say, no, it's basically just like 5e with a few tweaks. It's basically 5.5. Right. And so then it will be known, therefore, as 5.5. Or if it's very different, that conversation will say, well, the person says, will it be hard to learn? And the DM will say, well, if you know if you know fifth edition, you know the basics, but there are quite a bit of changes. So it's basically like 6e, right? That's
Hmm.
how it's going to be referred to because of what it ends up being.
Yeah. And if I can add to that, it was interesting when D&D Next was used as the placeholder name, which my understanding is 1D is also a placeholder name, right? It's not even the final name.
Mhm.
The intention at the D&D, at Wizards of the Coast was that the name of the edition would be Dungeons and Dragons.
Mhm.
and there would be no number used. And for a good number of months, they worked really hard to not say 5e anywhere, right? And they would instruct freelancers, anyone working with them, don't say 5e. And what did they end up all doing? Saying 5e, because they couldn't. It was impossible to not refer to it the way we refer to editions of any game. And it's true of, Shadowrun or anything else. When it's got a second edition or a third edition, it's a thing you've got to use to refer to it, to mention it. And we will have to have some contrast between 5th edition as we know it, the 2014 version, and this new version, which is clearly has substantial changes to it. Are those a 0.5? Are there 6e? It's hard to say. We've called it often, or at least I've called it often 6e, because it felt to me like it was going to go towards 6e territory. There were such substantial changes being talked about that it didn't feel like it was going to be 5th edition. And I could argue that even books like Tasha's are already like getting into a 0.5 type approach. So you go beyond that, you're really at 6e, where everybody's buying new books anyway, and you just kind of forget about the old stuff. Now, D&D has said recently, we are going to make sure this is backwards compatible. And even said, in our interview with Kyle Brink, he said, it's a 0.5. So, okay, it's 5.5 then. Maybe it's not 6e, it's more 0.5. That may still mean we're all buying new books, by the way, but it becomes that. And 1 D&D to me also, I do have a little bit of a sarcasm in me, and 1 D&D to me is the promise that we will have one edition till the end of time. And I can almost guarantee, I would take a large bet that will not be the case. And so for me, using the term 1D is almost disingenuous marketing that I don't even think the company is going to end up believing. Just like the idea of calling 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, I knew would never last. I don't think 1 D&D, this concept of a single edition that you can just make changes to, like it's a video game you're patching, we will end up with a 6e, if not now, in the future. And so it has an edition number, but it's not meant
that's
as
a great
disrespect.
point.
It's just
that's a great point. Even like Teos said, even within that interview, Kyle himself said it's a 0.5. So right there, we're seeing them using terminology they probably don't want to use, but they need to use it to clarify. And also, there's just the syllables.
Yeah. I had a conversation once with a designer where I called it 6e, and they said, that's not the right term. And I'm like, oh, what is the right term? And he says, I don't know. I thought that was great, right? This person working for the company, because it's like, well, yeah, I don't know. Well, we're going to figure it out,
Right. So until they figure it out, we will try to use 1 D&D, but it may come out as, for now, I'm happy calling it 1 D&D because that's what it is. But in conversations where we're talking about the future, I will probably continue to say 5.5 or 6e or whatever, because we don't know what it is going to be called.
Yeah.
But thank you.
Great question.
Yeah, it really was a great question, and helps us clarify what we think. And there is another question here. What do you think the idea of taking a base race lineage and then any sub-race lineage? For example, take elf with the Lightfoot halfling sub-race lineage. This is Chappy Thoughts via Mastodon. Teos, you start this time.
This makes me think immediately of what Cold Press is doing with their playtest, where if I understand it correctly, you can do that. You can be, a dwarf, and then you can take some elf sub-feature, sub-race feature to distinguish yourself. I don't love it personally. I feel like that's not the way to break up tropes, because now we're just confusing things. And I do like iconic concepts and breaking tropes all at the same time. I sort of like the idea of dwarves being dour as a thing, and then saying, but each dwarf is different, and even dwarf cultures are different. So this is a concept to keep in mind, but it's not the only concept, and it's not the reality on the ground of every dwarf you meet. The answer to that is not to me, take, the elven weapon training or whatever it is, because now it's sort of, unless what you're saying is, I grew up with elves. Okay, fine. But I'd rather tackle it a different way mechanically, organizationally than that, I guess. What do you think, Shawn?
Yeah. Yeah, I think we've probably talked about it a lot, but we have two separate things going on here. We have trying to make the mechanics simpler to learn and to utilize by packaging traits and abilities by different categories. Class is one of those categories. Subclass is one of those categories. Race turns out to be one of those categories, or has been. And some people do like to have that history in their setting where elves are just good at this. Could be, because of who they are. It could be because of how they grew up. It could be nature, could be nurture, whatever. They want that sort of firm grip on the setting and what it means to be a certain type of creature. And then there are the people that are ready to chuck that whole thing for obvious reasons, because we see it used in the real world in a negative way.
Mm-hmm.
So it depends on what you want in your game. I am ready to chuck the whole system and stop trying to make it work without carrying the baggage forward, and just say, let's make a new way to build your character. Let's make it easier to do. Let's make it quicker. Let's make it less confusing. Let's stop tying it to the past, problematic or not. Let's stop tying it to the past, and let's figure out a way to make it work moving forward. So I think it's fine to do that game mechanically. But like, as Teos said, it's just sort of punting this problem down the road rather than fixing it once and for all.
And it may also create problems at your table where it's sort of confusing what you're playing. You almost need to have the picture in front of your, on a little tent in order to really know, because whatever everybody's using can just be from all over the place. Then you don't know who anybody is. So yeah, these are tough things that I think we're all trying to figure out. And I think your idea, Shawn's a good one, which maybe it needs to be reimagined from the ground up, which is what you do more in a 6e than a 5.5. See how I tied that together?
True story. All
I
right,
bet
so
7e will do it.
Yeah, 70, all these problems will be fixed, but there will be a whole bunch of new problems thrown in. Well, thank you, Chappy Thoughts, for that question. And now we will get into our news and commentary section with a lot of juicy stuff happening this week, including D&D updating the progress and the events on a new community update page. This page went up on the D&D Beyond a few days ago, and it promises to provide community updates. This first update covers January through March of 2023. So it's sort of a project checklist for what they are doing, and then a list of events that they plan to be at in 2023. Do you want to cover the columns that this event or this progress checklist has?
Yeah, it's a done, in progress, and upcoming, which and then under them are different, types. So done is the SRD is in the Creative Commons. 4 playtest packets are released, and 3 surveys are collected. And then in progress is and this is kind of neat because it's something that was mentioned when we interviewed Kyle Brink, where I said, hey, can we get the basic rules in Spanish? And he said that, well, we're going to have something like that. And here it is: localize the SRD 5.1 in French, Italian, German, and Spanish. And that's not quite the basic rules, right? But I guess anybody could make basic rules out of them, sort of. Pretty close. They're going to also review previous editions, as they've said, for inclusion in Creative Commons. They're going to publish and now the phrasing of this is a little different. The Wizards of the Coast internal content policy for D&D products. So they're not telling us what we must do. They're now saying, here's what Wizards is doing so that you can use this as a guide as well. And then the last one is update the D&D core rules, which I thought was sort of interesting phrasing, because I think, well, aren't you just creating one D&D? But I think what they mean is really just the core rules. If you think of Player's Handbook, DMG, and Monster Manual, what they're saying is that we're going to get to play with and provide feedback on not just the Player's Handbook as we've been doing, but that we're going to start seeing DMG and MM pieces. So that'll be interesting.
And what's in the upcoming?
Yeah, just one single thing, which is ensure 1 D&D rules updates are compatible with 5e and the SRD. And that's very interesting to see that emphasis. It's almost as if, and it's a weird chart a little bit because it's like, obviously this is not the only thing the company's working on, right? But like, this is the one thing that they've added there, to, I guess, to underscore its importance to the community.
Yeah. That was the most interesting thing to me. Actually, that's not true. What the most interesting thing was to me was what's next, which is the 2023 community events. So we get a list of events with dates, a description, and where they're happening. And you and I have always talked about Wizards of the Coast needs to get out into the community more. They need to, put their developers out there, their designers out there, just so for everyone's good, for the designers good, for the community's good. So everything is understood, and we know that these are actual people who are making this and not some massive evil overlord company doing it. And it seems like they may have been listening because they put a lot of events on here. There's a D&D Direct event, which is online, happening in March, which I haven't seen any news about yet.
It's
And if it's
interesting,
happening
yeah.
in March, they have about 2 weeks. There is a learn to play program called Your Adventure Begins that is coming April 6th through 9th in Wizards Play Network stores. And they used to do store events they used to do D&D encounters.
Right.
So I was very excited about this to see this. What else have they
Absolutely.
put on the events list?
So there's a DM camp where stores will receive kits to teach players how to DM. That's going to come out in the summer. Awesome. And then family friendly. Build a community together. Join your local game store for kits for family play. So this is a kid oriented, the whole family with your kids, building somehow, doing something around D&D with that. That's really cool. That'll be in the fall of this year. And then there's the giant list of conventions, and it includes your typical things like Gen Con, but it also has like UK Games Expo and Big Bad Con. So some different names there, Gamehole. And I'm curious, how this comes across, because there are a lot of conventions that Wizards staff attend, but they don't necessarily do it in an accessible manner, right? And when I really think of what's made a difference to gamers, to the community, is not when you see them up on a podium, but when they are at a table unexpectedly with 5 other players who are like, oh, wow, I'm playing a game with Chris Perkins, right? Oh, wow, I'm playing a game with, whoever. That is what, everybody sees that and goes, wow, they're playing the game like we play the game.
Mhm.
And that's really neat, right? I mean, I know for me, it was very great. I got to DM Chris Perkins one time at Winter Fantasy, and that was great to see him as a player and see what a good player he was really
Mhm.
cool. And everybody at the table just, was so happy to have that experience. And at other tables were other people. In fact, they were even play testing things for the next edition when they did that. And that was very cool to see them play test classes nobody had seen before. It was
Yeah.
excellent.
Yeah. And so that was exciting. What's not on this list is this Content Creator Summit, which saw a lot of discussion on Twitter, and we're going to talk about in just a few seconds. But first, we want to get to the release of Honor Among Thieves in preview at South by Southwest to mostly glowing reviews. I read the headlines. I wanted to enjoy the movie as it is, so I did not read any reviews. I generally don't read reviews of movies anyway, because who are you to tell me what I like or don't like, or what movie is going to be good or bad? Because I'm going to figure it out for myself.
Well, I can tell
Uh,
you don't like reading reviews.
this is true. You know me very well. It's almost like I just said it. Uh, so what did you take away from the reviews and what you read of them?
So I did read all the reviews, but it was kind of amazing how good all these reviews were. At first, I just saw some links on Twitter, and I said, I don't know who these people are, whatever, some things. But apparently, what happened is that at South by Southwest, there is a secret showing where you just sign up to go see a movie to review and experience, and it was the Dungeons and Dragons movie, and people coming out of this, whether they are very established reviewers or not, are saying really good things about it. And these are people who didn't go to see a Dungeons and Dragons movie, right? It was dropped on them unexpectedly, and they're like, "Wow, this is a ton of fun. I really had a great time." They underscored that the characters work well, the CGI works reasonably well, and in some places glowingly well. The story has heart, and it feels a lot of like a Guardians of the Galaxy film, which is what we were told at the very beginning it was going to be like. It has that kind of fun to it, while having good story, good heart to it. So there are some reviews here you can look at in our show notes. Those are awesome, but then you may get to see it a little early, Shawn.
You might. I just saw on Amazon that they have a special early showing on March 19th at 2 p.m. in select theaters. You have to do it through Amazon Prime, and thank you to Dave Rosser for originally putting this out on the internet.
Yeah.
I was so excited because there is a couple theaters within an hour drive of me that I could have gotten to, but I won't be available Sunday at 2 p.m. for family reasons. So I'm not going to get to the early show. So Teos, we're going to have to wait an extra week to review the movie.
Well, I am going to see this. I am not an Amazon Prime member and don't believe in that, but anytime you buy something, they do ask you to please join their fundraiser. So I did order a book, and I signed up for the free Prime so I could get this show and get the tickets to it, because I'm gonna go see this. And I can't believe 6 days from now I'm seeing this movie. That's absurd.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to see it, and hopefully it's so good that I want to see it again and again with my gaming buddies and stuff. But I'm gonna go with my son and wife to go see it and see what they all think about it. So I'm gonna not spoil it next time we record.
That's right. You'll have to wait a week. But if you want to hear more about the heroes of this movie, you can get their stat blocks on D&D Beyond in the Thieves Gallery. Movie heroes become NPCs. You can get a free set of stat blocks that reflect the characters in the movie: Doric, Edgin, Holga, Simon, Zenk, Forge, Sophina, a red wizard, including art for all of the actors, in character. The Doric stat block does say that she can turn into an owlbear. So it says right at the top of the article, these stat blocks take a little liberty with the rules in some places. And that's to reflect something about the character. And I'm cool with that. I can care less.
It doesn't have to be 100% perfect. It's fine.
Exactly. So, did you have any thoughts about them, or just it was cool?
They they're a little spoilerish in some ways, but it all depends on how you view spoilers and how much you want to walk in completely fresh or not. They're monster stat blocks, so to me that always says that you're taking a liberty with things to just explain how it feels. But I think they've done a really good job of designing these to feel like characters or NPC stat blocks, and be interesting. That's cool. So nice, smart thing to do. This is the kind of thing that if they weren't doing, I would say, why aren't they doing this, right? And so it's nice to see all these tie-ins happening. I mean, we don't really have it in the news here, but I'm seeing, chocolate bars that are D&D chocolate bars. It's almost bologna. It's not quite. Good try. And it's not mass market, but you can have action figures, right, are showing up in many permutations through various different licensing deals. And that's the kind of stuff that D&D needs if they're going to hit the larger goals they have, right? So that's good stuff to see.
In other news, for the first time ever, a D&D book has been a finalist for the Nebula Award for game writing. What book was it? Journeys Through the Radiant Citadel. It's been named a finalist for this year's award. Other nominees are video games: Elden Ring, Horizon Forbidden West, Pentiment, Stray, and Vampire the Masquerade: Sins of the Sirens. This is the first D&D product that has received such a nomination, and the award ceremony is in Anaheim, California on May 14th.
Great. Congratulations to everybody working on that book. That's neat.
For sure. Yep. And now let's get to this creator summit that we mentioned earlier. So several content creators who cover role-playing game content via Twitch or YouTube have started announcing within the past few days that they were invited to a content creator summit at Wizards of the Coast headquarters in Seattle. And as you might expect, in the drama that is the internet. This became a controversial thing. Anger, name calling, lots of FOMO, a lot more. There's so much to discuss. I feel like we could almost have a whole show on just discussing this.
Yeah.
But Teos, the rumor has it, and by rumor I mean you basically said so, that you are one of these invitees, and you talked a lot about it on your blog.
Yeah, yeah, I did blog about it. A couple of days went by and I didn't say anything, and I know some other people who are just not saying that they're going, which is probably the safest choice. But you know me, I like to stick my foot in it, and one of the things I wanted to do is just sort of, I don't know, try to at least give a historical perspective to this, because I've been to an event that's a little bit similar that you were invited to, but you couldn't attend, which was back when before they had announced 5e and D&D Next. They held an organized play summit, you might call it, at Wizards of the Coast, and they invited a number of people, and then they surprise revealed, hey, this is actually, after we'd signed our NDAs, hey, you're actually here to hear about that we're going to launch a new edition of not 5e, they didn't call it, but a new edition of the game, and you get to play test it and all these kinds of things. And when you look at who attended, it was sort of similar in that it was a lot of bloggers and people who were known online. Though, and this may just easily be the way it was back then, those people were also people who had a very long kind of history of interacting with D&D and knowing D&D and its programs. So we actually did, talk about things like organized play programs, and everybody was able to participate because they all understood these concepts, right? And really understood the company of Wizards, the brand of D&D, the game of D&D, all of it. So I think this event is something like that. The term content creator has thrown people off.
Mm-hmm.
Because for a lot of people, it depends where you sit, right? If you are in live play kind of things and streaming, that's what you think is content. If you are an RPG writer, content is words, it's PDFs or it's hardbacks, right? And so when you hear the word used in a different way, it can really trip you up. And so I think a lot of people who design RPGs heard the term Content Creator Summit and said, wait a minute, why am I seeing people who are influencers, as I might call it? And in fact, influencer is a name that it looks like D&D is trying to use less and actually call it instead content creators. And so that brings up, I think brought up a lot of this tension was around the idea of what is Wizards trying to do, especially post OGL, who is being invited and why, and that kind of thing. What do you think, Shawn?
I think that's one aspect of it that can be chalked up pretty quickly to just terminology.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They want influencers there to see what they're doing, so those influencers can go back and talk to their communities and get the lowdown on what's happening. And obviously Wizards feels that if these influencers, many of whom were critical of them during the open gaming license fiasco, can just see that these are people who love D&D, working on D&D, and this is how Wizards operates, and it's not an evil empire. It's a bunch of gamers, who like the game and who want the game to succeed, working on their passion.
Yeah.
If they can see that, that's will be the gist that gets back to the influencers audience. And that's fine, right? Wizards has been doing it for years. It's not necessarily in this way, but they've had at Gen Con, they would have media days where they would run games for media members. It wasn't at the Wizards of the Coast headquarters. It was at Gen Con, but same thing. They've done this forever. It's just since it's being done in a heightened media presence of this open gaming license stuff, putting D&D in the news in a bad way. So now they need to try to get that narrative flipped. Then the blowback against the influencers came from not D&D content game creators, but just from people in general saying, oh, if you go, you're a sellout. If you go, what about your journalistic integrity? These people aren't journalists. let's not mince any words there. Journalists are held to a certain standard.
Mhm.
The freaking Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, right? Talk about the freedom of the press, and the press
Yeah.
means something. The press doesn't mean people standing on the streets yelling, right? The press has its own special place in the world, in history, in
Mhm.
society. Influencers are not journalists, and that's not to denigrate anything that they do.
Right.
They're entertainers. They do provide information, but journalism has with it a weight
And you and I
that
have said this. There have been times that someone has said to us in a comment, and they've used the word journalist with us, and it's like, no, I know we share news, but we're
right.
not journalists, right? We do
No,
not go through all of that training. We don't abide by those principles. Like, it's really very
right,
different, right?
right. And even if we have gone through that training, there comes with it that a process, and we do not follow a journalistic process at all
Mhm.
in any way, shape, or form. Right? We throw our opinions in. We laugh about it. We will take rumors and talk about them
We choose
because
which aspects of a story to cover, right?
exactly. So I doubt that any of these people who are going are journalists by not by training, maybe they are, but by what they do.
Mm.
So to say that they're ruining their journalistic integrity, no, they're not. They're doing exactly what it is that they are there to do, which is do stuff that is cool content, get information, provide it in the way that they best want to get that content across to whoever their audience is. It's not right, it's not wrong. That's their role.
Mhm.
So, yeah, understand that. And I'm fine with everyone who's going, anyone who's going. It's all good.
And I think there's two parts to this, right? There's that as an individual who is attending, who may or may not identify themselves as an influencer or a journalist or any of these things, that individual is going there for any number of reasons, right? To know more, so they can be more in the know, to share information with the people who subscribe to them or follow them or whatever it may be. They may be going there hoping to change Wizard's mind on some issue that they consider to be important, which could be entirely different from another issue that someone
Mhm.
else wants to press, right? Um, th- there is no standard for that. Everybody can be all over the place in this. And then Wizards from the other side is hoping all these folks come in here and provide some measure of feedback, right? They want to take the temperature of everybody who's there.
Mhm.
What kind of things are people asking? But that doesn't mean Wizards is there looking to immediately do things with whatever is shown to them, right? They're going to
Mhm.
listen. They're going to make note of the big major issues, and but they're at the same time, like you said, Shawn, trying to then provide their take on things and try to win people over to
Mhm.
that aspect. And that was certainly something that happened way back when. It was maybe not to the well, actually no, I would say it was just as critical as this one was
Mhm.
because things that have been talked about. I have to be careful because we were under NDA then, and it's probably worth talking
Mhm.
about that contrast. But being under NDA,
Mhm.
I took copious notes there because I love these kinds of things and I'm fascinated by RPG history. So I made lots of notes, and I can't share any of those because I'm under NDA on it. I don't think the NDA expired. I'd have to check. But I can look at what other people wrote, and so like Critical Hits wrote about that event. I linked to that in my blog, and one of the things they said is how important this meeting was to D&D because of what Paizo was doing at that time, because of how 4E sales were going, and all these numerous issues. So it was exceedingly important for Wizards to have that meeting back then and try to
Mhm.
explain, hey, here is this. And it came out clearly. We left that meeting going, they are passionate about this new edition they're creating, and it's neat, it's different, it's innovative, they're really trying things. And so we all came out with a very positive impression. Will we feel that way at the end of this one? Who knows, but that it makes sense for Wizards to try to do this, right? I mean, that's and
Mhm.
and the best scenario is that they can honestly say to us why these things they're doing are so awesome, and we can
Mhm.
come back and report on that because we all want it to be awesome, unless you're just in the business of hating a company, in which case, well, so be it. But that's what we're here to do.
Yep. And I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say when you come back.
Yeah. I just want to say one more thing, Shawn, which is the NDA aspect is very interesting to me.
Yeah.
NDAs are not being used this time, which is why we ended up with all this tension online, right? It's because one of the people who got a letter said, "Hey, look, you won't believe the letter that I got," and so what? I didn't get a letter, right? And so it creates that tension because we're all talking about it beforehand, um, and I think it's all very unfortunate, and I bet Wizards chose not to use an NDA because of the leaks. They have to just assume that, as with the OGL, anything that would happen is going to get reported on. So they're not going to use an NDA at all. But what that also means is now we really know, like, it's all, you can only, Wizards is only going to share the things they want repeated.
Right.
And even each other there attending, the attendees have to only share what they don't mind someone else repeating.
Right.
So, like, let's say I want to really turn the screws on some issue. I have to think about whether I want someone talking about that. And that's unfortunate, because that's what I love about NDAs is NDAs let Wizards talk to us about things that never came to be.
Right.
And we could give them very honest and pointed feedback, respectful but pointed, and they could then take that into account, right?
Right.
But it's going to be a little different this time. And so I hope it doesn't erode the benefits of the event because of that.
Well, it goes back to D&D being the game itself being a creative process. Right. And that's exactly what, and people can say I hate NDAs. NDAs are the devil. Well, what Teos is exactly right. What NDAs allow you to do is do something different, do something radical, and not worry about consequences for trying that. And it is sad that everything that the people at this content creator summit will see are things that everyone's going to see 2 days later. And they won't be able to get down into some of the more complex rules, but also complex conversations that surround D&D as a game, D&D as a hobby, and where D&D fits into our world. It's not going to elicit the kind of feedback that they might need to hear that you could give more explicitly under an NDA. Yep. Well, with that, we will be reporting more on, I'm sure, as time passes and the summit happens. When is that summit again?
It's the 3rd. So it's the beginning of the month.
Okay, it's the 3rd of
April. Yeah.
Okay, so it's coming up soon. Okay.
I'm trying to juggle all my dates in my mind. Yeah.
Some of us didn't get an invitation, so we don't know.
I'm sorry.
I'm just saying. I am so glad I was not invited.
And that's another thing, is that if you weren't invited, like, it can be for any reason. There's so many reasons why someone might be invited and not someone else, and it might feel so comparable, or that you have more viewers or reach or whatever. But there's so many vagaries of why one person is chosen and not. And I'd say to everybody, do not take it personally. I've been left out of so many things, and I will be left out of so many things in the future. And everybody's gonna, if you're around long enough, you'll get into some, and you'll not get into others. And it's not always logic. It's definitely not a thing that you should take personally and feel bad about.
Very true. There are 3 Kickstarters that we want to talk about. The first is the Acquisitions Incorporated Series 2, which is kickstarting right now. They are looking to create a 10-episode series that looks at, if I remember correctly, the current situation within AC Inc. after the end of the last live play, where everything sort of went back to a reset, I think.
Yeah. They've had some time travel play and then some interesting things, and so this is kind of taking you back to the start, but with some teachings from what happened, almost like you get to redo it and try it a different way. So we'll see how that goes. They are
Mhm.
closing in on their goal, not quite there yet. So if you love ACK Inc., please take a look and try to help out. There's probably by the time you listen to this, something like 24, 25 days left to back
Mhm.
it. So you got a little bit of time there.
Yep. And the Forge of Foes Kickstarter is continuing. Teos was one of the primaries on that, along with Scott Fitzgerald Gray and Mr. Michael Shea. And so get in on that if you can. A lot of cool stuff coming from three great minds,
Thank you.
and
Thank you.
also Teos. And
Thank you so much.
the Grim Hollow Valakan Clans Kickstarter, which I worked on with Ghostfire Games, is ending Friday night at midnight. So you have just a couple of days to get in on that if you so choose. I definitely appreciate the support.
The link is in the show notes. So if you've got our show notes, just click on that link. And in fact, we'll put the link in the YouTube video so you can get to these because you don't have time. You got to click. Yeah.
Gotta click quick.